Story 1. Randall adjusted the windshield wipers as rain hammered against the rental car. "This is it, man. This is the one that's gonna blow up our channel." Luis glanced up from his phone, the glow illuminating his skeptical expression. "An abandoned mill in the middle of nowhere? We've done 5 of these already, same views every time." "Not like this." Randall's eyes gleamed with that familiar hunger Luis had learned to recognize. Willow Creek isn't just abandoned, it's forgotten. The whole town shut down overnight in 1987. No explanation, just gone. The mill loomed ahead through the rain, a skeletal silhouette against the darkening sky. 3 stories of broken windows and crumbling brick, surrounded by rusted machinery jutting from the earth like ancient bones. Luis felt the familiar thrill despite himself. This was why they'd started the podcast, not for the views, though Randall obsessed over those, but for this exact moment, the anticipation before stepping into the unknown. They parked near the collapsed gate and gathered their equipment: 2 cameras, flashlights, audio recorders, and Randall's prized thermal imaging device. "You getting this?" Randall was already filming, narrating in his podcast voice. "It's 7:47 p.m. and we're about to enter the Willow Creek textile mill, abandoned for nearly 40 years. Local records show 23 workers simply vanished the night the mill closed. No bodies, no evidence, nothing." Luis shouldered his backpack and followed, the crunch of broken glass beneath their boots impossibly loud in the stillness. The rain had stopped, but water dripped from every surface, creating an irregular rhythm that felt almost like breathing. The main floor stretched before them, a cavern of collapsed ceiling beams and upturned chairs. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing scattered papers yellowed with age. Wait, Luis grabbed Randall's arm. "Look at that!" In the dust covering the floor, a set of footprints led deeper into the mill. Fresh footprints. The tread pattern was clear, recent, cutting through decades of accumulated grime. Randall's camera swung toward the prints. "Holy shit, someone's been here, recently." "Maybe other Urbex people?" Luis suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "No way, look how isolated this place is." Randall was already following the trail, his excitement palpable. "This is perfect, mystery upon mystery." The footprints led them through what must have been the foreman's office and toward a stairwell descending into darkness. A rusted sign read, "Boiler Room, authorized personnel only." Luis hesitated at the top of the stairs. Something felt wrong. The air coming up from below was warmer than it should be, carrying a smell that made his stomach clench. Meat left too long in the sun. Copper and rot. "Randall, maybe we should—" But Randall was already descending, his flashlight beam swallowing into the black. Luis cursed under his breath and followed. The smell grew stronger with each step. The boiler room was massive rusted tanks in a maze of pipes. What Luis didn't expect was the light, flickering in orange like firelight seeping from beneath a metal door at the far end. The door was new. The hinges gleamed with recent oil. Randall's hand was already reaching for the handle when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong in an abandoned building. Humming, low and rhythmic, almost like a lullaby but wrong somehow. The melody twisted in on itself, notes bending into uncomfortable intervals. "Someone's down here," Luis whispered. His every instinct screamed to run, but Randall was already pulling out his camera, his eyes bright with that reckless hunger. "This is insane. We have to see what this is." Before Luis could protest, Randall eased the door open. The hinges made no sound. Recently oiled, Luis thought again, his mouth growing dry. Beyond was a tunnel. Concrete walls, electric lights strung along the ceiling. Impossible. Someone had built this, maintained it, powered it, in an abandoned mill that supposedly had no electricity. The humming grew louder as they crept forward. Luis's hands trembled on his camera. "Document everything," he told himself. "Whatever this is, document it." The tunnel opened into a room that stole the breath from Luis's lungs. It was a living space, furniture arranged with careful precision, a table set for dinner, photographs on the walls, dozens of them. But something was profoundly wrong with the images. The people in them were smiling, posed in family groupings, but their eyes were empty, dead.
and in the background of each photo, barely visible, were shapes, human shapes that didn't quite align with human proportions. On the table sat 3 plates, fresh food, still steaming. "They're here," Louise breathed. "Right now, they're here." A door on the opposite wall stood ajar, and from beyond it came voices, multiple voices, speaking in unison, the words intelligible, but the tone unmistakably conversational, like a family discussing their day. Randall moved toward the door, camera raised. Luis grabbed his shoulder, but Randall shrugged him off, that obsessive gleam now consuming his entire face. "We have to see," he whispered. Before the crack in the door, Luis saw them, a family seated around the larger table, mother, father, 3 children. At first glance, they appeared normal, but as Luis's eyes adjusted, the wrongness revealed itself. Their movements were too synchronized. When the mother lifted her fork, all 5 lifted forks in perfect unison. When the father turned his head, all 5 heads turned as one. And what they were eating? Luis's stomach lurched. On their plates, arranged with meticulous care, were pieces of something that had unmistakably once been human. The smallest child struggled with something between her teeth, worrying at it like a dog with a bone. The wet sound of her efforts filled the silence. Randall's camera was still recording. The red light seemed impossibly bright in the darkness. Then, the father's head snapped toward the door. All 5 heads snapped at once, moving with mechanical precision. Their eyes locked on the camera's red light. For a moment, nobody moved. Luis felt frozen in amber, unable to even breathe. Then, the family smiled, 5 identical smiles spreading across 5 faces. "Guests," they said in perfect unison. Luis ran. His body moved before his conscious mind caught up, pure survival instinct taking over. Behind him, he heard Randall scream, heard the clatter of equipment dropping, heard footsteps, too many footsteps, giving chase. The tunnel blurred around him. His flashlight beam jerked wildly, casting manic shadows on the concrete walls. Behind him, the voices called out in that terrible unison, "Don't run! Stay for dinner! We've been so lonely!" He hit the stairs at full speed, nearly falling, catching himself on the rusted railing. His lungs burned. Behind him, Randall was shouting his name, the words stretched thin with terror. Luis burst into the main mill floor and kept running, not daring to look back. Through the machinery, past the foreman's office, toward the distant rectangle of moonlight that marked the exit. Something grabbed his backpack. He spun, swinging his flashlight like a weapon. It connected with flesh, with bone. Someone, one of the children, he thought, though it was hard to tell in the chaos, stumbled backward. Then Randall was beside him, his face white sheet, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. They drove together, crashing through the mill's entrance and into the night. The rental car was 50 yards away, might as well have been 50 miles. Luis fumbled for the keys, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped them. The engine started on the second try. Thank God, and Luis floored the accelerator, gravel spraying as they fishtailed onto the access road. In the rearview mirror, Luis saw them, standing at the mill's entrance, backlit by moonlight, the family of 5, watching with those empty, synchronized eyes, not pursuing, just watching, waiting. They drove in silence until they reached the highway, then the nearest town with a police station. The sheriff was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who listened to their story with increasing skepticism. "The Willow Creek Mill," she said slowly. "You boys been drinking?" "We have footage," Randall insisted, pulling out his camera. But when he played it back, the recording stopped exactly at the moment they'd entered the tunnel, as if the last 20 minutes had simply never happened.
The sheriff agreed to send a deputy to investigate. Lewis and Randall waited at the station, drinking terrible coffee, neither able to meet the other's eyes. When the deputy returned 3 hours later, his face was pale. "There's something down there," he said quietly. "Bodies. Multiple bodies. Some recent. Some—" He swallowed hard. "We need state police. Maybe FBI." The investigation that followed made national news. They found 17 victims in the bunker beneath the mill, some dead for months, others for years. Evidence of ritual cannibalism. a family that had been living in the darkness for decades, sustained by their terrible hunger. But they only caught 3 of them, the mother and 2 children. The father and the eldest child were never found. 3 weeks later, Lewis sat in his apartment, staring at his laptop. Their podcast had exploded, 2 million downloads and climbing. Randall called every day, wanting to do follow-up episodes to capitalize on their fame. Lewis stopped answering after the 5th call, not because Randall was pushy, that was nothing new, but because of what he'd heard in Randall's voice. That same obsessive hunger from the mill, but deeper now, darker. And when Lewis had finally answered once, asked about the nightmares, the therapy, Randall had just laughed. Nightmares? Man, I've never slept better. The numbers are insane. We're viral. Then, softer, almost to himself, they made us famous, Lewis. Maybe we should thank them. Lewis had hung up. He hadn't picked up since. Because every night, in his dreams, he heard them, that synchronized humming, that twisted lullaby. And sometimes, in the moment between sleep and waking, he saw 5 shadows standing at the foot of his bed, their eyes empty, their smiles identical, waiting. And in the mailbox this morning, he'd found a photograph, taken recently judging by his clothes. It showed Lewis walking to his car, unaware of the camera. And in the background, barely visible in the shadows of the parking garage, were 2 figures, their faces obscured, their postures unmistakable. On the back of the photo, written in 5 different handwriting styles, all saying the same thing: "See you at dinner." Story 2. Gerard's phone died somewhere between mile marker 47 and complete darkness. The bus had broken down 3 hours ago in a town too small to have a name on his map, and the next one wouldn't arrive until morning, if it arrived at all. The driver had been apologetic but unhelpful, suggesting Gerard wait at the closed gas station or start walking. Walking seemed reasonable until the fog rolled in. It came fast, swallowing the road in thick white curtains. Gerard's breath formed clouds that mingled with the mist, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. His jacket, fine for the bus, was inadequate for November in rural Montana. He'd been walking for 40 minutes when he heard the car. The engine sound emerged from the fog like a ghost, growing louder but remaining invisible. Gerard stepped to the shoulder, waving his arms, feeling foolish and desperate in equal measure. The headlights appeared first, 2 yellow eyes boring through the white. Then the car itself materialized, an old sedan, maybe 70s vintage, immaculately maintained. It stopped beside him. The passenger window rolled down manually, and a woman's face appeared. Mid-50s, pleasant features, the kind of smile that belonged on someone's aunt. "You look half frozen," she said. Her voice was warm, concerned. "Where are you headed?" "Billings," Gerard said, teeth chattering. "My bus broke down. I just need to get somewhere with a phone, maybe a motel." "Billings is 2 hours away, and the fog's only getting worse." She leaned across to unlock the passenger door. "I'm Kathleen. There's a town about 15 minutes up the road. You can stay at my place tonight, get warm, use the phone, head out in the morning when this mess clears." Gerard hesitated. Every instinct his mother had drilled into him screamed about stranger danger, but his fingers were going numb, and he couldn't even see the road anymore through the swirling white. "I really appreciate it," he said, climbing in. The car's interior was warm, almost too warm, and smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something chemical he couldn't quite place. Kathleen pulled back onto the road, driving with the confidence of someone who'd navigated this route 1,000 times. "You have family in Billings?" "Job interview. IT position. Starts Monday, so I figured I'd get there early, settle in." He was babbling, he realized, nervous energy. "I'm Gerard, by the way. Sorry, should have said that first." "Gerard," Kathleen repeated, and something in the way she said it made his skin prickle, like she was tasting the name,
testing its weight. That's a strong name. Classic. They drove in silence for a while. Gerard found himself wondering how Kathleen could see anything at all, but she never slowed, never hesitated, taking curves he couldn't see coming with perfect precision. "Here we are," Kathleen announced. "Welcome to Prospect." The town emerged from the fog like a stage set. Main Street was a single stretch of buildings, general store, diner, post office, all dark and shuttered. Streetlights cast weak orange pools that the fog devoured. Gerard saw no other cars, no pedestrians, no signs of life at all. "Quiet place," Gerard said. "Oh, it gets lively," Kathleen said. "You're just seeing it at a bad time. Everyone's inside on nights like this. The fog does something to people, makes them uncomfortable." She turned down a side street, then another, the houses growing larger and more spaced out. Her home was a Victorian-style two-story, well-maintained, but somehow cold despite its size. Lights glowed in several windows, and Gerard saw shadows moving behind the curtains. "You have family?" Gerard asked as they pulled into the driveway. "In a manner of speaking," Kathleen smiled that aunt-like smile again. "Come on in, let's get you warm and fed." The interior was exactly what Gerard expected. Floral wallpaper, hardwood floors, furniture that looked antique but comfortable. What he didn't expect was the wall of photographs in the entrance hall. Dozens of them, maybe 100, all different people, all different eras judging by the clothing and photo quality. But something was off about them. The people were smiling, but their eyes held a quality Gerard couldn't name, like they were looking at something just behind the camera, something they couldn't quite believe. "Family portraits," Kathleen said, following his gaze. "Prospect has deep roots, lots of history." She led him to a guest room on the second floor, clean, comfortable, with a bed that looked genuinely inviting after the day he'd had. "Bathrooms across the hall. I'll make some tea and sandwiches. Come down when you're ready." Gerard waited until she left, then immediately tried the room's phone. Dead. He wasn't surprised, landlines were practically extinct, but his stomach tightened anyway. He'll have to ask Kathleen if he could borrow her cell phone in the morning. The bathroom was pristine. Too pristine. Gerard noticed as he washed his hands that there were no personal items, no soap scum, no water stains. It looked like a hotel bathroom, staged and sterile. Downstairs, Kathleen had prepared a spread on the kitchen table. Tea in a delicate cup, sandwiches cut into triangles, cookies on a decorative plate. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, Gerard felt like he was in a photograph himself, playing a role in someone else's carefully arranged scene. "Eat up," Kathleen encouraged. "You must be starving." Gerard bit into a sandwich, turkey and cheese, perfectly fine, and tried to make conversation. "Do you live here alone?" "Not exactly," Kathleen sipped her tea, watching him over the rim. "Prospect is a tight-knit community. We all look after each other, share resources, share lots of things." A door opened somewhere in the house. Footsteps crossed what sounded like the living room. Gerard tensed, but Kathleen's smile never wavered. "That's just Marcus," she said, apologetically. "He's new to Prospect, still adjusting." Gerard forced himself to finish the sandwich, though his appetite had vanished. Every instinct was screaming now, but what could he do? He was stuck here until morning, until the fog cleared. And maybe he was just being paranoid, letting his imagination run wild because of a creepy old house and some awkward small-town people. "I'm pretty tired," he said. "Mind if I turn in?" "Of course not." Kathleen stood, collecting the dishes. "Sleep well, Gerard. Tomorrow's going to be a big day for you." The way she said it made Gerard's mouth go dry. Back in the guest room, Gerard locked the door and pushed a chair under the handle for good measure. He tried the window, painted shut. The room suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cell.
He was being ridiculous. He'd leave in the morning, hitch another ride, and this would become an awkward story to tell at parties. except he couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. Gerard lay on the bed, fully clothed, and tried to think. The photographs in the hall, Marcus's strange movements, Kathleen's careful hospitality, the way they both said his name like it meant something. He must have dozed off because he woke to voices. They were coming from directly below his room, muffled but urgent. Gerard pressed his ear to the floor and could just make out words. Perfect match, same build, same coloring. That was Kathleen. Too soon. We just did Marcus 3 weeks ago. The others will notice. A male voice Gerard didn't recognize. Running out of time. The body won't last another month. Gerard's heart hammered against his ribs. He stood slowly, quietly, and crept to the door. The chair scraped softly as he moved it aside, and he froze, listening. No change in the voices below. The hallway was dark, except for a thin line of light under a door at the far end. Gerard moved toward it, each step an eternity, his breathing loud in his ears. The door was cracked open. Gerard peered through. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the house. Clinical, sterile. Hospital equipment lined the walls, monitors, IVs, machines Gerard couldn't identify. The air carried the sharp bite of disinfectant, mixed with something metallic and organic. And in the center, on a gurney, Gerard bit back a gasp. It was a body, or what remained of one, covered by a sheet, but the shape underneath was wrong, incomplete. A heart monitor beeped slowly, impossibly, the sound weak and arrhythmic. And standing around it were 5 people, including Kathleen and Marcus, all wearing surgical masks, all staring down at the figure with an intensity that felt religious. "We need a replacement," one of them said. "Soon, or we lose everything we've built here." Kathleen will work. He's healthy, young, no family expecting him, perfect candidate. One of the others pulled back the sheet, and Gerard saw the face beneath. Slack, gray, eyes half open and unseeing. But the chest still rose and fell, still breathed. Kathleen continued, "Another week, that's all we can give this one. Then we make the transfer." Gerard ran. Forgot stealth, forgot caution, just ran. Down the stairs, through the entrance hall, past all those photographs with their wrong-eyed subjects. Behind him, shouts erupted, footsteps thundered. The front door was locked. Gerard fumbled with the deadbolt, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip it. Behind him, the footsteps were getting closer. The lock clicked. Gerard yanked the door open and burst into the fog-shrouded night. He ran blindly, buildings looming out of the white and vanishing just as quickly. He heard cars starting, engines roaring to life. They were coming after him. Gerard ducked between 2 buildings, pressed himself against a wall, trying to orient himself. Which way was the main road? Which way was out? He found the diner and recognized it from when they'd driven in. That meant the main road was there. Gerard sprinted toward it, his lungs burning, expecting at any moment to feel hands grabbing him, dragging him back. Headlights appeared ahead, multiple sets converging from different directions, their beams flickering on and off in perfect unison like a coordinated signal. One of them wasn't like the others. It was a truck, big and modern, with out-of-state plates, its lights steady and normal. Gerard threw himself into the road in front of it, waving his arms. "Stop! Please, you have to stop!" The trucker's brakes squealed. The driver, a middle-aged man with a trucker's gut and a concerned expression, rolled down his window. "What the hell, kid? You trying to get killed?" "Please, you have to get me out of here. Call the police. There's something wrong with this town. They were going to..." Behind him, the other headlights were getting closer, that eerie, synchronized flickering intensifying. The trucker saw them too, saw something in Gerard's face. "Get in, now." Gerard didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled into the passenger seat and the trucker floored it, the big vehicle surging forward into the fog. In the rearview mirror, Gerard watched the lights of Prospect fade into the white. The other cars followed for a while, their headlights still pulsing in that unnatural rhythm, then turned back one by one until they were gone. "You want to tell me what that was about?" the trucker asked. Gerard tried, got halfway before his voice broke.
The trucker drove to the next town, a real town with a proper police station, and waited while Gerard gave his statement. The investigation took weeks. Police found Kathleen's house, found the bodies, 17 of them in various states of preservation. Evidence of organ harvesting, identity theft, insurance fraud spanning decades, a conspiracy that had sustained an entire town through depression, recession, and time itself. They arrested 12 people, but Kathleen was never found. Neither was Marcus. Neither were 3 others whose names appeared on lease agreements, utility bills, and voter registrations going back 40 years. Gerard moved to Seattle after the interview fell through, changed his name, changed everything he could. But sometimes, late at night, he heard footsteps in his apartment building's hallway. Too measured, too deliberate. And last week, he received a package, no return address. Inside was a photograph of him taken recently, entering his apartment, and in the background, barely visible in the shadowed doorway across the hall, was a woman. Middle-aged, pleasant features, an aunt-like smile. Written on the back in familiar handwriting. Perfect fit. See you soon, Gerard.
Story 3. Alan had been planning the trip for months, ever since he'd stumbled across a Reddit thread about Eldridge Hollow, a farming community that had simply emptied out in the early 90s. He'd been obsessed. The photos were haunting. Barns with their roofs caved in, houses with doors left wide open, a church with pews still lined up like the congregation had just stepped out for air and never came back. "It'll be perfect," he told Jenny and Veronica over coffee one Saturday morning. "Real adventure, not some sanitized tourist trap. Just us, the open road, and a town that time forgot." Jenny, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. "And you're sure it's safe, like structurally safe?" Alan waved her off. "It's been abandoned for 30 years. If it was going to collapse, it would have done it by now." Veronica was already scrolling through her phone, looking at the images Alan had sent to their group chat. "These are incredible," she murmured. "When do we leave?" They set out on a Friday afternoon. Alan's truck loaded with camping gear, flashlights, and enough snacks to last a week. The drive took them through increasingly desolate countryside, endless fields of dead grass, rusted farm equipment sitting abandoned in ditches, the occasional rotting billboard advertising products that hadn't existed in decades. By the time they reached Eldridge Hollow, the sun was low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. The town looked exactly like the photos, only worse, more decayed, more forgotten. The main street was a row of false front buildings, a general store, a post office, something that might have been a diner once, all of them leaning at odd angles, their paint long since stripped by wind and weather. Alan parked in front of the church. It was the most intact building, its white paint still clinging to some sections of the exterior, though the steeple had lost its cross years ago. "This is amazing," Veronica breathed, already snapping photos with her camera. "It's like stepping into a time capsule." Jenny stood beside the truck, arms crossed, surveying the town with a wary expression. "Anyone else getting a weird vibe?" Alan laughed. "It's an abandoned town, Jen. Of course it's got a vibe. That's the whole point." They split up to explore. Alan headed for the residential area, a cluster of maybe 20 houses spread across 2 blocks. Most were in various stages of collapse, but one, a 2-story farmhouse with peeling yellow paint, looked almost habitable. The front door was missing, and Alan stepped inside cautiously, testing each floorboard before putting his weight on it. The interior was gutted. No furniture, no personal effects, just bare walls and the smell of rot. But in the kitchen, Alan found something that made him pause. Scratched into the wall beside the window, deep enough to gouge through multiple layers of paint, was a message. "Don't drink from the well." Alan pulled out his phone and took a picture. Probably just local kids trying to spook future explorers. Still, it was a good find, made for better storytelling. He met up with Jenny and Veronica near the edge of town, where the farmland began. The fields stretched out forever, overgrown with weeds that reached waist-high. And in the center of what must have been the town's commons, a patch of land where the grass had been beaten down by decades of foot traffic, sat a well. It was old, really old.
Stone construction, maybe 6 feet across, with an iron grate covering the top. But someone had pried the grate loose at some point, leaving it propped against the side. "Check this out," Veronica called. She was crouched beside the well, pointing at something carved into the stone rim. "This looks ancient, like way older than the town." Alan joined her, kneeling down to examine the carvings. They were symbols, crude but deliberate, spirals and crosses and shapes that didn't quite make sense, the kind of thing you'd see in documentaries about prehistoric sites. "What do you think it means?" Jenny asked, hanging back a few feet. "No clue," Alan said, "but it's cool as hell." He stood and peered over the edge of the well. The darkness below was absolute, swallowing his flashlight beam after just a few feet. He couldn't hear water, couldn't hear anything at all. It was like looking into a void. "Should we toss something down?" Veronica suggested. "See how deep it goes?" Alan found a rock and dropped it. They waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then, so faint Alan almost missed it, a sound. Not a splash, something else. A low vibration that seemed to come up through the stone itself, resonating in his chest, and beneath that, something that might have been an echo, or might have been a voice, too distorted to tell. The sensation faded as quickly as it came. "That's unsettling," Jenny muttered, taking another step back. Alan grinned, though his fingers had gone cold. "That's perfect. This place just keeps getting better." They set up camp near the church as the sun dipped below the horizon. Alan built a fire while Veronica and Jenny laid out their sleeping bags. The temperature dropped fast once night fell, and they huddled close to the flames, passing around a bottle of whiskey Alan had smuggled in his pack. "So, what's the story with this place?" Veronica asked. "Why'd everyone leave?" Alan pulled up the Reddit thread on his phone and read aloud. "According to this, the whole town just packed up in 1992. No warning, no official reason. Some people say there was a drought that killed all the crops. Others say it was contaminated groundwater. But the weird part is, nobody ever came back. Not to sell the land, not to collect belongings. They just left." "Contaminated groundwater," Jenny repeated, glancing toward the well. "Maybe that's why someone carved that warning." Alan shrugged. "Or maybe it's just an urban legend. Small towns love their spooky stories." They stayed up late, trading ghost stories and conspiracy theories, until the fire burned down to embers. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and they retreated to their sleeping bags. Alan woke sometime in the middle of the night. The fire was dead, and the darkness was total, the kind of black you only get in places with no light pollution. He lay still, listening. The silence was oppressive. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Then he heard it. A voice, faint, distant, coming from somewhere outside the church. Alan sat up slowly, straining to hear. It was definitely a voice, or maybe multiple voices, overlapping and blending together. They seemed to be chanting something, the words too distorted to make out. He glanced at Jenny and Veronica. Both were asleep, their breathing steady and deep. Alan grabbed his flashlight and crept to the church door. The chanting was louder now, clearer. It was coming from the direction of the well. He should have woken the others. He should have stayed put. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, something he couldn't name, pulled him forward. The thought felt natural, like it had always been his own, like going to the well was exactly what he was supposed to do. The well sat in the center of the commons, just as they had left it. But now there was light, a soft greenish glow emanating from deep within, pulsing in rhythm with the chanting.
Alan approached slowly, his flashlight beam trembling. The air around the well was colder, unnaturally cold, and carried a faint metallic smell, like old coins left in the rain. When he reached the edge and looked down, the glow intensified, and he saw something moving in the depths. Not water, something thicker, more viscous, churning and shifting like it was alive. The chanting stopped. Alan froze, his heart hammering. Then a voice spoke, not from the well, from inside his head, clear and cold and impossibly close. But it didn't feel foreign. It felt like it had always been there, like his own thoughts were simply agreeing with it. "What do you want most in this world?" Alan stumbled backward, nearly dropping his flashlight. What do you want?" the voice repeated, more insistent this time. And this time, Alan felt his own mind reaching for the answer, eager to respond, like the question had unlocked something he'd been holding back for years. "This isn't real," Alan whispered. "This is just stress, exhaustion, something in the water." "Speak your desire." But even as he protested, his thoughts were already forming the words. They bubbled up from somewhere deep, from a place of frustration and longing he'd tried to bury. The voice hadn't planted them, it had simply found them. Alan's mouth moved before his brain could stop it. The words tumbled out, raw and honest. "I want to be someone. I want people to remember my name. I want to matter." The glow in the well flared bright, almost blinding. Alan shielded his eyes, and when he lowered his hand, the light was gone. The well was dark and silent again. For a moment, Alan just stood there, breathing hard, waiting for something to happen. When nothing did, he laughed, a shaky, nervous sound. Okay, that was weird. He turned to head back to the church and nearly collided with Jenny. She was standing a few feet behind him, her face pale in the moonlight. "Alan, what are you doing out here?" He hesitated. "I heard something. Thought I should check it out." Jenny's eyes flicked to the well, then back to Alan. "You were talking to it." "No, I mean, not really. I was just—" He stopped. The look on Jenny's face wasn't confusion or concern. It was fear. "Alan," she said slowly, "your shadow. Look at your shadow." Alan glanced down. His shadow stretched across the dirt, cast by the moonlight, except it wasn't quite right. The shape was his, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too angular, and it was moving independently, shifting and writhing like it was alive. The shadow lunged. It tore away from Alan's body and surged toward Jenny, a black mass that moved with impossible speed. The temperature plummeted, and Alan felt cold spreading up from his feet, through his legs, into his chest. Whispers filled his ears, dozens of voices speaking at once, saying things he couldn't understand. Jenny screamed and stumbled backward, and the shadow wrapped around her ankles, pulling her down. Alan ran to her, grabbing her arms, trying to pull her free, but the shadow was strong, stronger than anything should be. It dragged her toward the well, inch by inch, her fingers digging into the dirt. The metallic smell intensified, mixing with something fouler, like spoiled meat. Veronica appeared, running from the church, shouting something Alan couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears and the chorus of whispers. She grabbed one of the iron grates and swung it at the shadow. The metal passed through harmlessly, but the shadow recoiled for just a moment, long enough for Alan to yank Jenny free. They ran, all three of them, sprinting back to the church, not stopping until they were inside and it slammed the door shut. Jenny was sobbing, her hands bleeding from where she'd clawed at the ground. Veronica held her, whispering reassurances that none of them believed. Alan stood by the window, staring out at the well. His shadow, his real shadow, was gone. Just gone. And in its place, a faint outline of something darker, something that didn't belong to him, something that pulsed with its own rhythm. "What did you do?" Veronica demanded, her voice shaking. "What the hell did you do, Alan?" "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know." Outside, the chanting began again, louder this time, closer. And in the darkness beyond the window, shapes began to move, dozens of them, shadows without bodies, circling the church, waiting. As Alan watched, one of the shadows shifted, its formless mass briefly taking shape, a woman's face, middle-aged, with an aunt-like smile. Then it dissolved back into darkness, joining the others. The well had granted Alan's wish, but the price, whatever it was, hadn't been paid yet. And judging by the way the shadows were pressing closer, their whispers growing into a unified chant, payment was coming due very, very soon.